I've got a fun little puzzle for us to solve. What would be the best way to give this painting more depth? I've been coaching this artist and helping them out with their storytelling, and atmospheric perspective is a really big part of that. And he sent me these two iterations, not sure about which one he should use. The darker one really helps that green mountain ledge really come forward, but this brighter one really allows the mountains to fall back into the distance. So which one should we go with? Or better yet, how can we combine the best of both worlds into one image? And if you have an idea on how you would address this, then pause the video and write your answer in the comments. It'd be really cool to hear your initial thoughts. Now, before I provide my answer, I think we can all arrive at the same conclusion if I simply talk about what tools we can use to create atmospheric depth. And the first one is value contrast. One of the reasons why our eyes are drawn to this area is just how dark this is up against some of these brighter values, not just from here to here, but also from here to here as well. Conversely, as we go further into the distance, the value of this, say against the sky, is much more muted. Even further back in here, that contrast gets even more reduced. We can even feel that this is in front of the mountains off in the distance, simply because the contrast of this to this is much higher than the contrast from this slightly reddish hue to this other slight shadow in here. And so this pulls this forward. So Alan has really already done a great job of creating an overall sense of depth here. We're just trying to tweak this to make this even more powerful. The second tool we have is color contrast. Once again, the blue to the yellow is not just a value change, but a color change as well, from blue to green. And even notice how the green in here is a much more vivid, brighter green than the slightly more bluish, muted green off in the distance. And even these reddish hues over here, they start off a little bit more purple, a little bit more colorful, but as they go off into the distance, they become more and more blue, like the sky, like the background. So for both value and color, we can simplify this to say that as things go further into the distance, they will take on the value and color of the overall environment, the background, the atmosphere of the piece, which is why it was such a great move for Alan to use blue in these shadows rather than just stick with these more green tones in here. This blue in here actually connects beautifully to the atmosphere, whereas it's in the light that we have a big separation. And that's kind of a tangential thing, but if you have your shadows connecting the atmosphere together and then the lights doing the work of standing out, you will have a beautiful separation and clarity in your painting. But moving on, the third tool is edges. If you just put your hand in front of your face and stare at your hand, peripherally the things that are behind your hand are just going to blur out. And so that can simulate the impression of depth as well. Now, Alan's work doesn't really use edges a whole lot, and so we'll stick with values and colors for the most part, but I will say that simplicity plays a role as well. These shapes in here get a lot more simple. We don't see as much variety in edges. We don't see lots of little details or little scraggly things quite as much as we do up in here. And so if you associate edges with more visual information, then we have a lot more edges in here. We also have more values and more colors playing around as well. So all these three things work together. But as these things get more simple out in here, it does contribute to the impression of depth. So with these principles in mind, we can now analyze the painting a little bit better. I've got the darker one on the right and the brighter one on the left. Now, both of these paintings grab our attention right here first, which is great. The highest value and color contrast is found in these places. But more specifically, we see a great amount of contrast from here over here and less contrast from here to here. However, the impression from this to this is now greater, whereas these are a lot more similar in value. And that's just one example of how you can create depth in a whole variety of ways. Both are working, but is there one that's better? Well, I would argue that this one is better because it gives more deference to the light. In here, I feel a much greater sense of light, whereas on this side, we have a lot more of that blue and those slightly darker values relative to over here. Now, even though this feels like it's more in the light, we find that it's really not necessary to have a lot of light over there. Generally speaking, the light is shining down and striking the planes that face the right side. So to have a light on a plane that's facing the left can potentially create some visual confusion. It's not really creating visual confusion, at least for me, for either of these, but this does seem to work better in reinforcing that this is a plane that is different from the plane over here, which gives it more clear structure. And naturally, our eyes do gravitate towards the light as a thing of beauty, which is why, again, I keep coming over here as being a more beautiful composition when we're just looking at how we create depth in this front mountain ledge. But as we get further back, I find issues. The contrast in here against this, it's kind of taking those mountains off in the distance and pulling them forward. And by pulling them forward, say from this value to this value, you can see the value contrast in there. Well, it's actually not very different from the value contrast in here. Whereas from say here to here, we've got clear contrast, and then here to here, we have much less. So these darker values over here is really starting to compete for attention. It's competing a little too hard. Like I think of these things as these different objects as all vying for attention. They want to be seen, they want to be known. And sometimes we have to let some areas fade away to bring others out. As artists, we're always managing relationships. And so while I like this area for this painting, I don't like this area. I much prefer this one as far as creating depth. Now, subjectively, you might look at this and think, well, there's something that's nice about this. There's a kind of a darkness to it. It does actually, if you compare this to this, it brings out it kind of brings this forward a little bit more, whereas this falls away. There's not much contrast here. So we're just constantly managing our relationships where we need to be scanning our paintings and really looking to see how one thing affects another. So let's see how this would look. I'm going to take this darker value and I'll create a new layer and just paint right on top of this area in here. You can see that it's going to connect a lot more to the shadows on that front mountain ledge, and we're okay with that. As we discussed, we know that this is going to help the light on that front mountain ledge stand out a whole lot more. So I put all this in here, and then I'm actually going to put it on this mountain ledge as well. We're going to talk more about this one later. And notice how this is already creating more of a separation from here to here. So again, all these relationships impact each other. Now I will reduce the opacity, and I can just find an amount of depth that I like. And I think something like this is really helping this light stand out against that background. So going back to the originals, I think it's interesting that the one on the left is trying to push everything back. The one on the right is trying to pull everything forward. But what we just did is this, pulling the closer mountain more towards us and the mountains further away, pushing them back. And isn't that so cool that we can really kind of stretch and expand different parts of space on a flat surface? Like, that's just so cool that we can do that. And these are objective tools. Like, I just followed these basic principles, put them into practice, and now we've created an effect. Art is not always as subjective as we make it out to be. We can really command our work and confidently know that other people are going to view the painting in the way that we want them to, as we rely on a lot of these technical principles. Now I'm coming back to the originals because I think we can do a little bit more with this. A moment ago, we were just focused on the relationship between this and this back in here, this as well. But we also have this section in the middle. This needs to be properly placed in between this and that. And obviously its shapes have already done that, but we want to use our values and colors to really reinforce it. And so let's come back to these principles. The shadows on this side, as they relate to the light, the values are not really different at all. They have very low value contrast. They do have color contrast. We've got these kind of reddish purples in here, and we don't see those reddish purples back in here. So there is a color contrast, that's nice, but values will always trump colors if they just, in a one-to-one battle. And also let's consider that if this mountain needs to be becoming more like the sky, then technically shouldn't this value be brighter and this value be darker? Because the sky is brighter than both of these. So what I'll do is take this value here, and with a new layer, I'm going to paint on top of this. Not only is this going to help with depth, but it's also going to help reinforce the impression of light in this piece. And the more we can reinforce the impression of light, the more believable and three-dimensional of an image we'll have. I don't need to put it back in here because this is starting to fall away more into this realm of depth. But look at how just by darkening this, I now created a new separation. I brought this a lot more forward. See how this kind of feels flat in comparison? This is now, it's properly placed. The value of this compared to this still pushes it further back, but now the value contrast from this to this is still significantly different than the value contrast of this to that. And also with color as well, we don't have this green anywhere else in here. So now it's been properly placed. So I can thin this down just a little bit if I want to keep some of the little textures that Alan had so delicately put in, reinforcing the color separation. And then when I bring in that original pass I had done before, now everything is really starting to come together with a lot more depth. So before this was brighter than this, but now we have a value that's darker and this is brighter, which gives it that sense of air in between that second mountain ledge and the mountains behind it. Now, one consequence of doing all this is we've increased the contrast from here to here, and maybe we should tweak that as well. With the changes we've made so far, what mattered was addressing this area and this relationship with this. So we do have room to make this area a little bit brighter. If we can make this more similar to these, maybe that will help keep them connected and still push those areas further back. So this time I'll take this value, and again, just keep working with new layers. I am covering over some of what Alan has done, which is unfortunate, but I'm just showing you the impact of these big bulk changes. So I'm just gonna bring this color into these areas, and it might not be perfect. I might need to use a softer edge for some of this, but let's just see what happens when I drop the opacity now, and I can just find the right spot for it. So I think something like that. And again, these are big bulk changes. Like if I might get a bit extreme if I kind of bring it up to here. Maybe I could go in with an eraser. Let's make sure I have a soft erasing tool. You can see the change I just made in there. What if I want this to be a little bit dark, set this cloud more in front, having this darker can also create some separation here, and I want this to be connected and I want this to jump away. So again, I'm just kind of thinking about all the relationships as they connect with each other. Something like that. This kind of creates like a sense of fog down in here, and then maybe it's lifting, that mountain is lifting up out of the fog, similar to how Alan had captured it before. Isn't it so cool? We're just like pushing and pulling these things around, and we're not changing the shapes at all. We're just working with atmospheric depth. And these same principles will work for even things like still lifes and portraits. Like I'm thinking about atmospheric depth when I'm painting faces. And I've started with these big broad parameters, and I'm getting more and more narrow as I work. Like I'm wondering at the relationship between this and the sky versus this and the sky as well. These feel like they're kind of all in the same area, and I'm seeing that I could knock this back just a little bit and let this cloud come more forward. But it wouldn't have been easy for me to see before. So this time I'll just take this one, cover over it. Now if you're doing this kind of thing traditionally, obviously you can't just paint over an area and then try to thin it down. A lot of this kind of atmospheric depth needs to be planned out in advance. And usually it's good to start with your values and colors very close together and then expand them further away from each other to kind of pull the mountain towards you. But you can start with everything off in the distance and then kind of just do this the whole way through for traditional painting. Now I really like how the shadow values back in here connect to the sky. This might be a little bit too bright, so I'll also take this and just do a very gentle pass on top of that. You can see how that just knocks it back. Now I don't love the placement of this cloud. I kind of wish that it was a little bit lower so we could see some of the mountain peaks a little bit better. I don't like how the edge of this lines right up against the edge of the mountain range right here and right here. So that does create some visual confusion. So definitely shapes and your placements of things have a significant impact on depth as well, but we're not going to focus on that for this video. All right, so I've done a lot of work to push things back. We pulled this forward. What about this area, right? So if we want to create depth, wouldn't we want to increase the contrast in here just in an attempt to bring this closer? Well, not necessarily, right? This, I would argue, is much more of the focal point of the painting. And this is where storytelling comes in. We can make this come more forward, but what if we could do it in a way where it feels like it's close to us, but it's not the focal point? It doesn't grab our attention. So let's go through the three tools. If we used values in here, if we brought in darker shadows like these, would this benefit this area? Well, I would argue no. Again, values are the most important thing as far as creating a sense of depth. If we brought in dark shadows in here, then it would begin to compete for attention with this in here, which I don't want to do. What about colors? Well, we're seeing that generally as things get closer and closer to us, we're able to bring in some more reds. You see some browns in here, some nice vivid greens. And we could accentuate this further by bringing in some more blues. Like if I took a value like this, the value is fairly similar to the one in here. It would just need to be a little bit brighter. So I'll take something like this, keep the value close to the grass, And I could just kind of smatter some of this in, again, just to show you the impression that it has. If I just kind of knock this back a little bit, so we see that color variation going on in here, and that is having some kind of effect, but it's not quite competing with this in here. So I don't love that, but it is serving a purpose. But I think what it really needs is just more edges and staying within a close range, not deviating too far in values and in color. But if we can bring in a lot of sharper edges, more details, just little, fronds and, more shapes of grass coming through like this in here, and just bring it all into here, then I think that will serve the purpose where we're using our edges to pull it forward, but it's not going to be grabbing anyone's attention. So I had that discussion with Alan. We mapped it all out just like this video, and then he got to work and he sent me this. And you can see how he's implemented all of these things. He's reinforced the depth here. He's let this fall back very nicely. This is so much more prominent now. And he also brought in those subtle but sharper edges in the foreground. So I'm just super proud to see this, and I hope you can all see how this has objectively improved this work of art. And I hope you can all see how you can really control where and when someone looks at the painting using these principles of atmospheric depth. There's a lot more nuance to it when it comes to the storytelling aspects, but this is a great place to start in understanding how to really bring time into a painting. Like, you think this is a flat surface. We normally think that we experience art just by looking at everything all at once, but that's really not what happens. We look at a specific area in the painting first, and then we look at something else next, and then something next. And so what we think of as these timeless pieces of art, we actually bring time into the painting by determining where and when someone looks at the work, right? You see the mountain ledge, and then you see the one behind it, and then the one behind that. That is a sequence of events that you are experiencing. That sequence of events can be converted into a story where you bring time into a timeless work of art. Like that, isn't that so cool? And this is all technical principles. This is all objective, cause and effect. These things are reliable tools that you can use to tell a story. And storytelling it's one of the deepest, oldest traditions of our humanity, and we get to be a part of that as we create art and bring people into what we experience in this life, in this beautiful world that has been beautifully made for us to experience and be in awe of. And as artists, we help people see, we help people change their perspective, we help people appreciate and really transcend into something greater. And I get excited about this, but I'm also just so excited to see this artist's growth in this area, and I hope that you can grow a lot as well. So I am doing coaching. A lot of you know that I'm doing free critiques, but if you're interested in coaching, just start by sending me a critique, and then we can get talking about that, what that looks like. And it's something that I'm just playing around with, but so far it's been a blast to help young professionals, help people who just want to learn, a whole variety of people with different backgrounds. So check out the links in the description if you're interested in that. And also, if you want to see Alan's journey unfold, you can follow him through the links in the description. And if you have any questions, just reach out in the comments. All right. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Take care.